For 2 years I worked as a video journalist in Ireland, and it taught me a lot about making short form videos for online, as well as just teaching me a lot about how to interact with people and how to get really great interviews from people as well. It's kind of interesting because I just fell into the job. I had recently moved to the Republic of Ireland after living most of all my life really in Melbourne, Australia, and I didn't have any experience with being a reporter or doing anything journalistic. In terms of video experience, I had studied filmmaking at uni as part of a communications degree, and I knew a little bit about freelance camera operating and editing short form videos in the documentary space. And when I say documentary, they're more interviewing, corporate documentaries, interviewing people about something they were selling or about a story they had that linked into something else. It wasn't necessarily documentary journalism in the way that you might be expecting. I kind of wanted to study and wanted to do something to further my skills and maybe get into a new role or a new pathway. And I happened to enroll into an MA in journalism. And at the end of the course, I ended up applying for and getting a Google fellowship, which was basically Google was going to pay me 2 months worth of wages to a company that would take me on for a different role. Luckily for me, that 2 months turned into 2 and a bit years. And this is how I became really proficient at video journalism and journalism in general. And I thought I might share some interesting tips and things that I learned about interviewing and videoing people to make short form online content of a news doco-journalism style, but also how to mix the technical and the personal in order to make a piece of content that is really getting to the heart of what you're trying to say. Number one is create a personal connection. Now, depending on the kind of story you're being tasked to do or that you want to tell, can vary in terms of how you go about doing it. But basically, as a video journalist, I wasn't necessarily doing a lot of the hard-hitting political kind of stories where I was grilling politicians or anything kind of that nature. Obviously, I did do that occasionally, but I was doing a lot of the softer side stories of these political debates. For example, in Ireland at the time that I was a video journalist over there, the debate around legalizing abortion was really big over there because in that country they famously had not legalized abortion. And I basically spoke to people from both sides of the debate. I spoke to people as the referendum was happening, and then the ultimate result when they did pass the legislation and abortions did become legal. And obviously, because you are trying to interview both sides and get both sides of the story, you've got to kind of really understand where these people are coming from their point of views, even if you personally don't agree or you disagree. Whether you want to make documentaries, YouTube videos like this, or basically just interview other people, it's really important to make a personal connection. And this can be quite daunting when basically, I was a one-man band. I operated the camera, the sound equipment, and also then had to conduct the interview myself, sometimes with very limited timings, and sometimes in a way where I didn't have much time with the interviewee beforehand. But I think taking a couple of minutes before the camera switches on, even while you're setting up the camera, this is something that I kind of did quite often when I was setting up the tripod, putting the camera on, maybe if I had to set up some lights, and then put a lapel on them or get the microphone ready. I would ask about their day. I would say, if we were meeting at a particular location, what was it like getting here? They call it small talk and stuff like that. I know some people hate small talk and they're not very good at it. But you will be surprised how well agreeing with another person on, oh, that traffic was bad, wasn't it? And being truthful about it. I don't think you should lie about how you felt about the morning traffic, say, for example. But I think being agreeable in the fact that maybe traffic sucks, if that is what the person is grumbling about or talking about when you ask them how how did you get here or something like that, or did it take you very long? I think the way you respond to them in these small talk moments really can help them make you them feel more comfortable with you as an interviewee, and make them feel more at ease when the actual interview takes place. Because even though cameras are so small now, they're DSLRs, they're on iPhones, they're on smartphones, and everyone you think would be very much used to having some kind of camera in your face, with the modern world, you'd be surprised that when some people realize that it is something that is going to be committed, and especially if you're a journalist, potentially shown across the whole world, through social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, it suddenly puts a whole different emphasis on the questions you're going to be asking and their answers. And you kind of if you can, want to try and remove, take the artifice away, even though it's undeniably part of what you're trying to do and what you're trying to get from this person. This next one is really interesting because it's something I see just in filmmaking in general, but this is about the balance between the story you're trying to tell and the technology you're using to tell that story. Put another way is, how great do you want the shots and the video to look versus the actual content you're grabbing? But with that also said, you can't deny the visual aspects as well. I mean, ultimately, you're trying to find that sweet middle ground between respecting the subject and getting the soundbite, the quote, and the great story from them, while also getting decent imagery that can complement their story. And this can be really quite difficult, especially if you're in a constantly moving situation where you're in a protest, you're in a riot, or you go to someone's house and their house just doesn't really look that visually engaging. And you really don't have time to do a little bit of set decoration, change things around. And I think when it comes to video journalism, what I learned is that the story is the most important. And I think that equates to a lot. But with that said, you don't want it to look bad. And I think it all becomes about managing your expectations. But it's always a fine balance between the technological aspects of filming something really visually stunning, as well as trying to tell this story, I think. So it's something that you've got to take case by case when it comes to that. But I will probably always say it is something that you always have to strike a balance in, and you always have to make compromises. And I think when it comes to video journalism and documentary, that's okay. Number 3, which I think is really important in terms of just more the interviewing side, is just let people talk. I mean, this may sound quite obvious in terms of from a documentary interview point of view, but I think nowadays with the fast-paced way that a lot of media journalism runs and news stories and stuff, it's all about getting the story as quick as possible out there and getting the quote and the thing that will sell the story and make people click on your video or news website rather than someone else's or a rival company's. Even though you are tight on time, I think it's always good to let that breathe, especially if there's an emotional element to it, and let the interviewee figure out what they're trying to say. And sometimes this can result in 5 minutes of them rambling to make themselves feel comfortable from the head of what they're trying to say. But it also can give you a little bit of context, especially if it's a story you don't know too much about and you're trying to dig for the core of what's going on. It's really helpful a lot of the times to kind of just let that person speak. I think sometimes a lot of people kind of just want to get in, butt in, interrupt, be like, oh, why are they talking about that? No, I want them talking about this. Of course you want them to hit certain points, but I think you've got to let them speak because it shows a little bit of respect, and I think that's super important and when it comes to news journalism, documentary. But B, I also think it does help with making the situation a whole lot better for yourself once they become more comfortable with the situation, and sometimes they just need to figure that out themselves through talking through it. And the last point I want to talk about is just have empathy. Sounds really simple, I know, but I think a lot of people don't do it. I think in an age where everything wants to be fast, quick, done now, and the age where I think a lot of the time people are really self-obsessed to a certain extent, I I think some people, when they want to do these interviews, they're more thinking about the end result. They're more thinking about, oh, this is going to cut really well together and look good for me, which, I mean, you're obviously going to think about how it's going to cut together and look good, but you really need to be present there with the person while they're telling their story. But usually everyone's story is really fascinating and really interesting to them. And I think having the empathy to realize that and to be really in touch with that is really, really helpful in getting really great content from people. Maybe I shouldn't say it that way because everyone uses that word content. It's become a bit of a negative word at times. But just to get people's really good, a really good story from people in a way that is really honest and has a lot of integrity. So that's kind of it. That's some more broad kind of topics. Didn't go quite, into the atomical detail around some of those things. I reckon I might release another video that maybe talks more about the technical aspects of how and the kind of setup I had and where I would go and how I would do these interviews. Because, oftentimes, other than the rare occasions where I had an extra reporter with me, and I could just focus kind of mostly on the technical aspect, I was the one-man show doing kind of everything. And I'll talk a little bit about that setup as well. But I just wanted to kind of start off with a bit more of a broader strokes about key things from a kind of widest perspective that I really think are important and that people should keep in mind when they are doing this kind of documentary journalism type of work, but can also help when you're doing more corporate-based work. I think being personable, having a lot of integrity in the way you talk to people. People are not automated products that you can push, pull, or insert a code into so that they can say the things you want them to say. Unless maybe they're actors, or maybe that's how it works. But people are people. I know that doesn't sound much saying it like that, but it is really important that you respect them as a subject, no matter the kind of circumstance, whether it's more corporate-based video or whether it's journalism. So I hope that was really instructive, and I hope that helped some people when they're more thinking about how to interact with people when stepping into this kind of world and stepping into this kind of industry as well. But let me know what you guys think, and thanks very much. Andy out.